Good morning to everyone, or maybe good evening, depending on your time zone. I'm not really aware where everyone comes from right now, but let's start with this live class session about BR235 convergent charging. So it will introduce this training course regarding convergent charging. Maybe one comment up front. It is called BR235. In a lot of other cases, it's still called AC235, I guess, in the invitation as well. So it was only recently renamed. So if you see AC, which stands for accounting, because all those courses belong to the accounting domain in the past, and now they were moved into their own BRIM domain. Therefore, they have now BR as the first two letters. So if you see AC or BR, that's the same. We are still in the transition phase right now, just to avoid some confusion. So what would I like to show to you? So first of all, I would like to show where this convergent charging and the training for that belongs into the whole BRIM solution landscape. Then I will show some overview of the convergent charging itself, and I will introduce the fundamental charging and rating concepts behind that product, convergent charging, which are also the main part of the training in the end. Then I will show a business case example, and in the end, briefly have a look at the architecture and show some additional information sources. But let's start with the overarching BRIM solution. So BRIM stands for Billing and Revenue Innovation Management. And this is a suite. So let's motivate why SAP developed BRIM. So in the past, the business model was mainly selling physical goods. So what the customers did, they had physical goods, which they sold to their customers, and that's what they had to do with the software. So it was mainly using the R3 model SD for that, sales and distribution. So when they sold the physical goods. But the business models nowadays are shifting towards services. So instead of selling the physical goods, the business models shift into business models where the vendors sell services instead of physical goods. So most prominent example for that are, for example, the mobile phone services. So you have a contract and the service you get is for voice, for SMS, for data, for example. Or another one is parcel services. So the service provider sells the service of delivering parcels instead of selling physical goods. And it even goes further. So also traditional companies which sold physical goods like air conditions are now changing the business model into something where they sell the service. So they do not sell the air condition itself, they sell cold air. So they rent their air conditions, and what they want to charge the customer for is the cold air they produce. Or, for example, if a vendor produces drillers, so he will not sell the driller to the customer, but he will sell the holes to the customer, which were produced with the drillers. So there we have consumption-based services. So the customer consumes services, and we charge for the service and not for the product itself. So this is how business models shifted in the past. And so the main difference between the old models of selling physical goods and services is, of course, the logistics part. So if you sell a service, you have other ways of delivering that service to the customer than you did with an air conditioner, a driller, or whatever. But the second very important difference is usually the volume. So when you have a business model based on services, then this is usually a high volume business model. So you have a very high transactional volume when you deliver services to customers instead of the physical goods you sold to them. And this is where BRIMs come into play. So BRIM is optimized for volume. So when we used previously sales and distribution model in R3, which is also integrated with a logistics part, then we now use the BRIM solution, which consists of several components, which I will highlight later on. But in principle, what is covered by the BRIM solution? So first of all, we have the business model design and the pricing configuration. So we can model our products, our services. We can model our price plans for that. Then we have a component which is for sorry, I don't have to touch my screen. Then we have a component which does the subscription order management, which means the orders and the contracts are managed within that component. Then we have an area where we do the usage metering and we calculate the prices for the transactions, so the services the user consumes. And then we have, in the end, the billing, receivables, and collections. So we did the classical accounting topics. And also we have a partner revenue share, which is also a big part in that thing. So if you think about selling services, for example, if you stream music, for example, then a partner revenue example would be you have to pay royalties to some other companies. So this is then the revenue share you pay to those royalty companies. So and there the partner revenue share, for example, kicks in. So yeah, so that's what I said. So we shift our business models from selling physical goods into selling services. And for that, we at SAP created BRIM, the SAP Billing, Revenue, and Innovation Management solution, to deal with those scenarios on a B2B, B2C, or even B2B2C model. So we can implement business models for business to business or business to end customer scenarios with that solution. And the most important thing is it's focused on very high volumes. So we can cope with high volumes which will occur in the future when the business of the customer evolves. Taking a closer look at the suite. So what I said, so we have different areas in that suite. So we have the subscription and order management. So we have a component which is in the end the SAP S/4HANA service SOM component, which is part of SAP HANA. And this is then responsible for managing the orders, the contracts, the customers. This is the master data system there. Then we have another system which collects the usage, which does the metering. So this is called conversion mediation. There we get all the consumption information from, and it prepares that consumption information from a technical level, from the technical systems, into something which the accounting systems could process and create invoices from. Then we have this price and charge area in the process. And there we have this convergent charging, which is there to calculate the price in the end. So to perform the rating. And this is where we use sub-convergent charging. And this yellow part is also the part which is covered in this training BR235. The result of the rating step, price and charge, will be handed over to the process step bill and settle, which will then be the convergent invoicing component. It's also a component located in the S4HANA product. And within that, we can then process the rated consumptions. So the events got a price in the convergent charging system, and then those priced events will then be aggregated and grouped into meaningful way to create in the end invoices. And if you want to create real invoices, paper or digital, then we can generate the correspondence from that with document presentment by open text, which is another component in the suite, which can be used to create the invoices. And all what we created here will then go into the customer financial care, so which means it goes into the general ledger for further processing and so on. So then here we are in the real accounting world. So this is the main process which is covered by SAP RIM, Billing and Revenue Innovation Management. And we focus on this price and charge part here. If we zoom in into that, we see we have different things which are covered in SAP Convergent Charging as a solution for that process step. So we have the master data management. So we store some master data in the system. So what we have is the subscriber account, which is called business partner in most other SAP systems. Then we have the external account in that system, which is the contract account. This is the account we charge in the end. And we have the provider contracts, not the full contracts as we have them in the S4 system, where we have all the information like payment information, the addresses, contact information, and so on. The provider contracts in convergent charging only store the pricing logic, the pricing rules, which are bound to that contract, which were made with the customer, and all the legal aspects of that contract are stored in the SOM, in the subscription order management system, and only the technical aspects for rating and charging are stored in the provider contract in the convergent charging system itself. And then we have the service pricing and modeling. This is the main part. This is also the main part in the training material. So we have a lot of unit there, and we have one very big unit, Unit 5, which deals with all the service pricing and modeling. So this chapter explained then how we can model the business requirements, so the pricing logic for the customer within the convergent charging system. And there we use different objects, which I will present in the next slides. So we have charge plans, we have charges, we have logical components. A big part of that are mapping tables, range tables. So we have tables where you store your business information, usually the prices. And we have some things which we call pricing macros. So when you come from an ABAP world, it's comparable to function module. So where you can put in logic you want to reuse across different pricing logics, different charges, different charge plans. We can perform the rating in different scenarios. So we could do pure online rating. So when a request comes in, we immediately rate that request. We create a price and move it on. But in most cases, we do offline batch rating. So we collect consumption over a period of time, an hour, a day, a month, whatever is suitable for the business case we want to cover. And we collect that information, we aggregate that information, and then we do a rating in a batch, which is much more performant. And then we have a special version of that, which is deferred rating. So we can collect the consumption for a period of time, for example, for a whole month, and then we do the rating at the end of the month when we know the complete consumption of that month, which enables us to implement other price logic patterns, like if the consumption of a month exceeded a specific threshold, then you will get an additional discount or something like that, which you can only know if you know the complete consumption of the month. But if you want to do rating further on the time, more recent on the timeline, so if you say I have to do the rating on a daily basis, not waiting for the whole month, you have other mechanisms within the Brim suite to provide volume discounts without waiting. But okay, that goes too far for this session. And additional to the rating and charging, we have a functionality which is called re-rating. So if something went wrong in your rating and charging process, because you notice you maintained wrong prices in your price lists, then there is a standard functionality called re-rating. So you can re-rate the events which already arrived in the system and create new billable items, new invoices from those, depending on how far your process already went on. You can just simply create new billable items, which is the first step in the process chain, or in the worst case, you can also cancel existing invoices and create new invoices with those re-rating processes. And this is technically not part of convergent charging anymore. This is the bill and settle, but that's where we interface to. So the raw data, it's the consumption data, will be stored in the consumption item management in convergent invoicing. So we can just read all the consumption which comes from the metering system into convergent invoicing and then store it there for later processing for the deferred rating. So we collect all the information in convergent invoicing over a period of time. And if a specific trigger is met, for example, end of the month, then this will start a rating session from convergent invoicing and provide all those consumption items back to convergent charging for rating. And the result of that will be billable items, and which are stored in the billable item management. So consumption items are the unpriced events, and billable items are the priced events, which are then stored in convergent invoicing. And then also the partner settlement, so distribute revenue across partners, is also a functionality of convergent invoicing. Okay, let's skip this one. So these are capabilities we have. It's in first place marketing, but this is, I guess, the most important slide in here to understand what exactly SAP convergent charging does. So SAP convergent charging is in the middle of the process chain. So we saw that we have a customer and contract system. So this is a system where we store all the legal data, the negotiated tariffs, and so on. So this holds the master data, the business partners, the bank data, and so on. And this contract system replicates the master data into SAP convergent charging and provides those legal information into SAP convergent charging, like the negotiated tariffs, some parameters. So what are the service level agreements which were assigned for that service, and so on. So these additional contractual data is provided from this system into SAP convergent charging. In the BRIM suite, the customer and contract system is S/4HANA Service SOM, subscription order management. And the other input we usually have for SAP convergent charging is an event metering system. So if we deal with consumption, so usage-based events, then we have a system which will meter the events on the network. So, for example, it will collect information about parcels, about phone calls, whatever consumption you can imagine. This is collected by an event metering system, and this event metering system provides this information then to SAP convergent charging. And SAP convergent charging is now able to process with the tariffs the contractual data it got from the SOM system and the events it got from the metering system or the mediation system via the algorithms which we implement in a graphical way. I will show that later in the system. And the outcome of that will be billing events. So it will send the billed events to a billing system. In our case, that is SAP convergent invoicing. And there we get the unpriced events from the metering system, which is provided by a mediation system. This will be processed and it will result in the priced events, which is then the basis for the subsequent process steps like billing, invoicing, and so on. So, which will then create the invoices for the end customers on the required detail level. But important thing is we have two input channels, the contract customer and contract system and the event metering system. So for contractual data, for consumption data, and the output are the billable items, which are the basic information to create the invoices later on. Said that, convergent charging can do a lot, but it does two things very good. And the two things it does are charging and rating. So charging is the functionality within convergent charging which identifies who has to pay for a service consumption. So the charging answers the question who has to pay. So in the end, we have a charging logic which will be graphically designed in the system, which determines in the end the contract account. So the account which we want to charge for a specific service. And the other thing CC does is rating. Rating is the process where it is determined how much has to be paid. So charging who has to pay, rating how much has to be paid. So these are the two main tasks for a convergent charging system, which it has to perform during this rating step, like we call it. So sometimes rating is also called pricing. So we call it rating usually during runtime. So if we get a consumption and we apply a price, we call that rating. During the design time, sometimes we also call it pricing. So because we put a price label on a specific service, therefore it's called pricing. So rating and pricing is almost the same. Usually we use rating during runtime and pricing during design time as a term for that task. And then all the logic we create in so-called price plans. That's something like that, which are completely modeled in a graphical way. So it's a development environment we have, but you do not write code like ABAP code, Java code. You develop that with a graphical environment and you implement your logic in form of decision trees within the system itself. The decision trees you can create to model your pricing logic have a specific structure. So as I said, it's a tree, so it's always a hierarchical form. So when consumption data arrives, or when the price calculation starts, you always have to put something on the trunk of this pricing tree, and it has to be always a rate function. And here you can distinguish between usage rate, recurring rate, and one-shot rate. So main difference is the usage rate processes consumption, which is provided by a mediation system. So all the calculations in that will be based on consumption. A recurring rate is a logic object you can use to model recurring events like a monthly fee. Then this contractual liability is provided by the SOM system into convergent charging. And for example, it says you have a mobile phone contract, and you have to pay a monthly fee of 10 euro. Then this recurring rate is modeled in the system with a frequency of 1 month, and the price it will trigger automatically, taken from a price table or from a parameter, is then the 10 euro, and this will create a billable item, the basis for the invoice, on a regular basis on its own. And then technically we have also the one-shot rate. This is something which happens just once. Within the context of BRIM, Billing Revenue Innovation Management, we don't use one-shot rates in convergent charging. But technically you could imagine if you activate a service, you have to pay a one-time fee for that. So activation of a mobile service plan costs you 10 euro, for example. Then this could be a one-shot rate, which will be triggered exactly once. Usually those one-shot rates are only used for technical reasons, but in convergent charging, in the context of BRIM, usually we don't use one-shot rates. So the middle of those trees, which we can model, consist of comparators, operators, and splitters. So since we have a tree, and in the tree, the thing why we create a decision tree is we always want to have the shortest path through the tree to determine the price. So we have no loops, no inefficient logic to calculate a price. So when we get a usage event, when we get an event into the system by a rate, then from that event, we can use comparators to decide going into the left or right branch of that decision tree. So we can, for example, with prefix switching, let's go back to a mobile phone example. If the dialed number starts with a specific prefix, so with the international number for the US, then we go into a specific price table for international calls, something like that. Or we can make decisions based on dates or numbers. If something is bigger than 100, do this. If it's smaller than 100, do something else. So this is the comparators which do a switch in the logic, so which branch the decision tree. And splitters do almost the same, but they do not make a decision go left or right. They branch the flow into two trees. So you can say with a splitter, for example, process everything which is below 100 with this logic, and the remaining rest, which is above 100, with another logic. So this is why we use splitters. But the bulk of all the logic is implemented with operators, and those are the basic elements how to create your logic. So the most simple one is, for example, arithmetic computation. So if you have two numbers, you could multiply them. The classical example for that is you have a quantity and you have a unit price in a price table. Then you multiply the unit price by the quantity, and then you know the amount you have to pay for something. So if someone has a voice call which lasts for 10 minutes and the price for 1 minute is 10 cents, then this arithmetic computation could be used to multiply the 10 minutes with the price per minute, which is the 10 cents, and then the overall amount for that consumption would be €1 for 10 minutes of a call. So that's what you do here. You have a lot of other things which I don't want to explain in detail right now. And then the last thing, every leaf of that hierarchical tree, decision tree, has to be a function. And the function is then that element which in the end creates the billable item. So this creates the bit which is then further processed in the billing system. So, and we have different kinds of items. The most important one is a flat one. So we calculated a price and we just pass out that price to the subsequent system. Another one is free. If we have a free component, that means we suppress creating a billable item. And the third one is no access. This is for raising errors. So if we calculated a specific, if you try to calculate a specific price, but we couldn't find the corresponding unit price in the price table because it was not maintained, then we can raise an error with a no access function here. So this will raise an error in the system, and then someone will be informed that it has to be corrected to process that information correctly. So, but in the end, this is how we model our logic in the system. And the training course explains that in detail, how we create all those objects. And in the end, this picture, this is the main picture, which is used throughout the course in several places, which explains in detail how we create all the components here to come up with the logic to do the price calculation for the rating step in your processes. So we have the billable item classes and the consumption item classes. These are structures which we create in convergent invoicing first. And then we can import those structures into convergent charging to model our pricing logic in the end. So, and there we create objects which we call a charge. And those charges are then the elements where we model usually the pricing logic for a specific service. So going back to our mobile phone services. So usually mobile phone has different type of services like voice services, SMS services, or data services. And you could go into the system and implement those different services as different charges. So you have a price logic for voice calls, which is one charge. You have another price logic for SMS consumption, which is then a charge for SMS. And you could imagine a third charge, which implements your logic for charging for data usage. So if you surf in the internet, use mobile data. And all of those different charges you put together into a charge plan. That's your tariff plan in the end, which you can then assign to a commercial product. So in the SOM system, the customer decides for a specific mobile phone tariff, which says, okay, in this tariff is included voice, SMS, and data consumption, and you get, for example, 100 minutes free, 100 SMS free, whatever. This is part of this commercial product, which is then sold to the customer with the order and then the contract. And this information, the contractual information, is replicated into something we call a charge plan. And this charge plan holds then all the individual logic for the different services the customer is able to consume. And to model that, we also have objects like tables and macros in the system. So tables are something where we can replicate the prices, for example, upfront. So the commercial system could replicate into those tables the standard prices for those services, but it could also replicate customer-specific prices into a specific set of tables called subscriber mapping tables. But you could also replicate specific prices for a customer there. And during runtime, when we calculate the price for a specific service, the charge, the logic in the charge, accesses all those tables for the information, all those contractual information, the parameters which are provided by the commercial system into the charge plan. And if we deal with usage, then we also have all the information from the consumption records which came in. So for example, for a phone call, we have the start time and end time from which we can calculate the duration. And from the duration, we know the number of minutes, and then we can apply, for example, a price per minute. So these are the different sources we have to calculate the prices for specific events. So we have the information in the mapping tables we store up front. We have the information from the contract we provide as parameters into a charge plan. So these are the parameters here. And we have the information we have provided into via the chargeable item classes, so the consumption data which arrives from the metering system. And based on those three data sources, convergent charging does the computation and come up in the end with a priced event, which is called the billable item. And it's stored in form of a billable item class in convergent invoicing. Okay, a lot of theory. So let me show one example. So one business example which we use throughout the BIA 235 training and which we develop step by step there is a cloud selection service. So that's a cloud service where we provide infrastructure as a service to a customer. So he can order specific instances in specific service levels. So he get a computer, so you get a virtual instance, and he will be charged by the three services: CPU, RAM, and bandwidth. So compared to the example I provided before, we have voice, data, and SMS. So in this case, we have a different example. So we have different usage types, like the number of CPUs which were actively used, the amount of RAM which was used, and the bandwidth, so the data which was transferred in the system. And for that, the customer can book specific price plans. So either he has a pay-as-you-go, so he pays for the consumption as it comes in with specific prices. So in that case, he has to pay 5 cents per CPU hour, 4 cents per RAM hour, and so on. But he could also sign for specific service levels, for example, silver, gold, platinum. The service level is then part of the contract in the end. And if he signs for another service level, he has to pay a surcharge for that service level. But in return for that surcharge, he gets lower consumption prices. So he has to pay only 4 cents per CPU hour instead of 5. And he also gets some free volumes. So included in those €1,000 surcharge for the service level agreement silver are 3,000 free hours of CPU usage, or 6,000 hours of RAM usage, and 350 gigabyte of free data volume for bandwidth, and so on. So we have the standard one with no surcharge, but the highest prices and no free volume. And we have 3 service levels, silver, gold, and platinum, which then have different service prices per unit and different free volumes. Common for all is the monthly base fee for this cloud instance. The customer orders is €1,000 and the runtime is 24 months. So this is the example where we build the pricing logic in convergent charging throughout the course. In the end, this is a rough example of the price plan which we create from that. So we start creating a charge, then we implement a price plan component in that. So this price plan component says all consumption of type CPU will be processed here. And then we start with the logic. So we calculate the CPU hours per unit. We determine which SLA level is used. So we look at the parameters provided by the contractual system, the SOM system. And if that parameter says, okay, the SLA of that contract is silver, then we pick up from a mapping table the minute price of 4 cents and multiply it with the total CPU hours we determined before. And this will then become our billing item, which will then be used to create the invoice. Okay, so that's mainly the logic which takes place within convergent charging. And maybe for those who are interested in the technology behind all that, so I have also a slide regarding the architecture. So that convergent charging is not a NetWeaver-based system. So SAP convergent charging is implemented on top of a native Java virtual machine. And within that implementation, we have something which we call the core server. And the core server has several instances which make up this core server. So we have one or several dispatchers. So this is the instance which receive all the requests. Those will be transmitted to the guider, and the guider will then identify the rater instances. So we have here one or many. So this is where we can scale the system. We can put many rater instances in the system which could run in parallel to scale our system for performance. The rater will then do exactly what we saw before. It will process those charge plans, will apply the pricing logic, and will transfer the result of that to the bulk loader. And the bulk loader instance is something which then moves that information forward to the billing system. We also see the taxer instance here. This taxer instance is already relevant if we run in an US mode of the system. So if you want to use the ESET tax scheme instead of the European value-added tax, then we use the taxer instance as well. And the last instance we have is the updater. This is used to do all the communication to the database, which is underlying the core server. So SAP CC could be installed on several different database types. So of course, the preferred one, SAP HANA DB. But you could also install it on Oracle database or SQL Server. And there are several others which you can look up in the product availability matrix, for example. So then you will find all the available technical combinations. But this is in principle the architecture we have. We have a core server running on a Java virtual machine where we have different instances running which are communicating with each other, and then we'll process the incoming information and create the billable items from that. Okay, one last slide for the presentation before we can start the question and answer round. So if you are looking for additional information about SAP convergent charging, then we have the help portal, which everyone can access via help.sap.com. And if you use the quick link CC, you will immediately get into the convergent charging area. And there you can select the version which you are interested in. This is the last version we had before. On the 7th of October, the SAP convergent charging 2020 was shipped. So now we have also 2020 here as a version number. And when you select that area, you get a lot of documentation, like the installation guide, so which explains how you have to install SAP convergent charging. You have a configuration guide and operation guides, and also you have a security guide there, which explains what are the specific roles you can provide to users in the system, and so on. So all the information you require to use convergent charging, you will find in this area. So also very relevant and frequently used documents is the web service documentation, so which describes all the APIs you can use to communicate with convergent charging, and the Java API documentation. So all additional information regarding convergent charging is stored in this help portal here.